Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. On today's show, we'll be discussing terrorism. Attacks at a seminary in Hangu and outside the Chinese consulate in Karachi have once again highlighted how terrorism affects Pakistan and its global impact. How does this square with Trump bashing Pakistan at a time that Pakistanis are losing their lives? We have joining us in the studios with us here in Lahore, our esteemed guest, Ms. Zunaira Azhar, who is a security analyst. And we also have Professor Sajjad Nasir, who is a defense analyst. And we're also going to have joining us on the line Brigadier Retired Asad Munir, who's going to be joining us in just a few moments' time on the line as well. Professor Nasir, I'd like to start with you, if I may.
Okay.
What do you make of the attacks that happened yesterday and what that says about terrorism as a whole?
Well, what has happened recently, and particularly the yesterday, it created a situation that they are repeating and what has happened in the past. The question is that in the present times, which is yesterday, how do you deal with it? The Chinese, of course, are responsible and been held responsible for whatever the others who have did it. Who are these people? Are they from Afghanistan? Or they're from Iran? Or from India? Which particular people are involved? And I think today the presence is that yes, they are responsible and they are by the Indians. They are mostly responsible for this. So the question is, if the Indians are, and in Afghanistan both, are responsible for the kind of things which are happening in the last 1 year, and even more before that, the events are such which are repeating itself. So the question is that how do we deal with it? But I think of recent times, I think the condition that prevails, the situation is under the control now, and this, what happened yesterday, they have been able to control and check it. So the question is, we have done in the last 3 years whatever happened, but now we have improving the situation. And under the circumstances, if the Indians and Afghanistan continues with this and create problems for us, that how we deal with it? Is it serve the Indians and Afghanistan, or if the Americans also party to it?
But
so
Professor,
the question is that who are responsible for it? So we have to consider that.
If I may push you on that point, because I imagine the Indians, the Afghans, and even the Americans would say the Pakistanis, through such a narrative, are trying to shift blame onto them. At the end of the day, this attack happened in Pakistan. How would you respond to that?
Who's responsible for this? As I said, the three I talked about.
But I mean, this attack happened in Pakistan.
The
right?
Americans,
so you know what I mean? The Pakistanis are held accountable.
So
right?
who is responsible? The Americans, the Indians, Afghanistan.
Okay.
The three. So the question is, where is the evidence? Now, whatever is present today and whatever that has come out, this is what I have said. Yes, they are responsible for it, which means all these three are responsible for it, so at least for the time being. So the question is, should we continue with this, with the Indians and the Afghanistan and the Americans together? And in that situation, we have to deal with it. And the Americans are not, giving us a very tough time, and they are not giving any money to us at all, and no concessions are available to us. So the question is, how do you deal with them? So under the circumstances, I think the situation is pretty bad. And the question is that how we deal with these three actors, and then the Chinese, of course. We have to get into the Chinese turn and try to find out that, the kind of investment that they have done here, this part, and they are responsible for it. And I think the police, they are responsible, and they are responsible for it, and they are going to hold it. And I think that is going to make responsible for it, and there will not be much of a problem there. But they should be able to deal with it, and I think this is very important. And for us, this is important that the Americans or the Indians or the Afghanistan will not be able to create the kind of an issue, because the Chinese themselves are party to it, and therefore they hold it and keep the maintenance. Because for another year or so, the kind of development that is taking place, and the Chinese are controlling them that area, And therefore, this will be a major, I think, development that will be taking place.
All right. Our guest is now joining us on the line, as promised, Brigadier Retired Asad Munir. Mr. Munir, thank you for joining us here in the scope to discuss not just the attacks that happened yesterday. I wanted to get your, of course, take on that. And in general, the fact that terrorism still affects Pakistan, and it is innocent Pakistanis' lives which are being lost in these attacks. What is your take?
These are two different incidents. One was carried out by BLA, that was at Karachi, and I think they were not suitably trained like other terrorists we have seen in the past, and they could not achieve what they had planned for thing. And the other thing, the Orakzai thing, I think most probably it must have been conducted by IS, because it was directed against the Shia community of Orakzai agency. And the IS Khorasan, it was initially formed by people from Orakzai agency. The first two, their commander or their leaders, they were from Orakzai agency. So it is very easy for them to come from Ningrehar to Afridi Tira, and from there to Orakzai Tira. And this place, Kalaya, there is a Shia population, and they targeted those people. Overall, we have seen that the terrorist activities have considerably reduced. Rather, now there used to be a bomb blast, suicide attack almost every week or twice a week or thrice a month. But now this thing has happened after a long time, and I don't think that it is going to continue, and there is going to be a new.
Okay, so let me push you on that point, Mr. Munir. Why do you think the security situation has improved so much in Pakistan?
The first thing is that their ability to strike, it has been dilated to a great extent since they have moved to Afghanistan. Now they do not have any place in Pakistan which is under their control. Almost the whole area of the Fatah, now it is the rate of the government is there. So it is very difficult for them to conduct these attacks continuously. And then there are a number of people, a number of terrorists from TTP who are so disappointed they want to surrender, but at a suitable place or on suitable term. So their ability is diluted to a very, very great extent.
But Mr. Munir, Donald Trump would not agree with you, would he? Because he tweeted very clearly that it is Pakistan who is responsible for a lot of the terrorism that occurs in the world. We, of course, had Prime Minister Imran Khan respond to him as well. But how do you feel about Trump's accusations towards Pakistan?
Donald, once he was not even elected 2 years before that, about Pakistan, he had always doubted our intention, our, a status of the lie, and he used to say that, to deal with Pakistan, we should strengthen India. India can keep a check on Pakistan. So he has got different, views on this whole war on terror. But, now, previously, there were terrorists in Pakistan in the areas which were not under our control. Now they have the Taliban, they have about 5% area under their control, or their concession in Afghanistan. So they don't need to be here. They don't need safe haven the way they needed in the past, let's say in 2005, 6, 7.
Right.
But now the situation has changed. They are, even in Kandahar, they are controlling 2-3 districts. In Mevan, they are controlling 10 out of 14. So why would they, have training facilities here in Pakistan? They keep on issuing and releasing this video of their training, and that is not Pakistan.
Right. Okay, so Zanira, I wanted to bring you in because you've been sitting patiently as we've been discussing with our other guests. I wonder what you make of the fact, as our guests have mentioned so far, Pakistan has made a lot of progress actually in the fight against terrorism. Why isn't it given credit for that?
I think it would never be given a credit. We are so blind to some facts, I'm sorry to say that why are we fishing for compliments? Okay. We know there is a trade war going on in the world at the moment. China is following a policy of engagement with all of the world, and America, as always, a policy of containment. So you are allying with someone who has always been following the policy of containment. not the one who is engaging. So now with the trade war at its best, how do you expect that America is going to give you some solace, some help, some kind of compliment? I don't understand that. I think we shouldn't be even discussing that why is there no compliment or encouragement or acknowledgement of whatever Pakistan has done so far for terrorism. Okay. It's only us who is going to tell the world what we have done, what we have achieved, and that has to be tactical, operational, and strategic. Right. It doesn't have to be just mere platitude. It doesn't have to be one speech in General Assembly, and it doesn't have to be one tweet. Right. So going on with the strategic kind of development programs like CPEC and One Belt, One Road initiative and all that, we are already giving world a message like this kind of direct investment can only come to a country when it's beneficiary for a certain group. So India acting as a proxy for US, this doesn't suit it, right? And with 4 consulate offices in Afghanistan, how do you see the role of Indians in Balochistan and all over Afghanistan? So this terrorism has changed from what it was in 9/11. It is very different from that. The problem is that we think that there is an exit strategy of US from Afghanistan. Right. The fact of the matter is US doesn't want to leave. This region, if this region becomes stable, it would benefit Central Asian states, USSR, Russia, Soviet Union, it would benefit Chinese. And do you think that they would want to do that, US? No. So the only way to handle this region is to keep it chaotic, just like they've done in Middle East. And it is us who are going to reveal it, whether we are going to contain it, and we have contained it. Right. We have fought the war on terrorism very well. Yeah. And I always give the example of Mehman Dam, from an agency which was under war, it is cleared and now it is developing. We are building a dam over there. It's not easy. Yeah. So the kind of developments that are happening in Pakistan, now India is scared that where are we heading? Because there is going to be a strategic shift in the region, which is not to the advantage of India. That's how I see it.
It's a very good point, Zanira. And Brigadier Munir, I wanted to get your take on that, because that is something that many people, I imagine, in Pakistan will be asking at this point. Who does it benefit when the Chinese consulate is targeted in an attack? We know, of course, that Pakistan is part of CPEC at this point. Who do you think it benefits?
Basically, they don't want good relation between China and Pakistan. There are countries, those are against this whole concept of CPEC, and especially the US and, of course, India. That's why they have, access to India, to Iran and Chabahar port, and then further laying railway lines. So there are many countries who are interested. Nobody wants the other country, especially China, to dominate the area. That is, as far as I think American withdrawal, I have my own view that they want to get out, and they are now talking to Taliban. In Taliban, they are very shrewd people. They want that, the decision has to be made by the American. The Ashraf Ghani government, they cannot survive without the American support. So they are talking to them, and at the same time they are conducting various terrorist activities to gain maximum ground and to be at an advantageous position on the table once they are negotiating. So Trump had declared that, I will get out of, Afghanistan, and they wanted that they should leave by 2020, and that's why they are talking to Taliban. I don't know that what benefit the U.S. will have by staying in Afghanistan for a longer period, that they are losing their men, their uniformed personnel, and a huge amount of, money in trillions. So I think they have to go, but they are trying that this area should not become again a launching pad for terrorists, for global terrorists. And they know that these Taliban, they are not global, they do not have a global agenda.
So as a final question then, Brigadier Munir, I'm wondering, you look at the issue of terrorism, why is it that this part of the world in general, and I'm not speaking just about Pakistan, but this entire part of the world, be it the Middle East, be it South Asia, why is it that the narrative is always that the terrorists are from here, even though, and I would ask my producer to bring up that map which I found online from Our World in Data, and it's a map which is from 2016 and shows the terrorist attacks that happened in that year, and the dark parts of that map which are coming up now show the fact that all the dark places are the ones where the most lives were lost, and all of those are within North Africa and the Middle East and South Asia. So even though the most lives are being lost in this part of the world, Brigadier Munir, this part of the world is still the one that is blamed the most for terrorism. What do you make of that?
Because the reason is that, the attack on American soil, they are mostly carried out by, since 1993, by Muslims from this area, whether as was Ramzi Yusuf or the 9/11, 19 or 18 terrorists. And then Osama bin Laden, he was here, he was in Saudi Arabia, and he was in Muslim country, Sudan. So this is one of the reasons. And then again, IS, what happened in Iraq, they went to Iraq, they thought that they have captured and Afghanistan is under their control. And they were so confident that they went into Iraq, and since then, they have not been able to. Now, this is, I think, their 18th journal here in Afghanistan. They come for 1 year, and there is no accountability. Nobody in US, no politician asked them that, what did you do in this 1 year? Why can't you defeat an irregular force who the force does not have those means? It is not a non-state actor, and you can't, capture or secure the whole of Afghanistan. That is the issue.
Very well, Brigadier Retired. We appreciate your time. We know that you have to go now, but of course, we appreciate the insight that you have brought into this conversation. I'll continue the conversation now. Professor Nasir, you've heard there Brigadier Retired's opinions on that map that I showed as well. What do you make of the fact that, as I put to him, the most fatalities from terrorism occur in this part of the world? It is Pakistanis, for example, that died yesterday in the terrorist attacks, be they of any sect, be they of any leanings, but they were Pakistanis at the end of the day. Yet it is Pakistan, for example, or other countries in this region that are the most attacked by America or others about terrorism.
I think under these circumstances, what we need to do is that we have to look towards India, of course. And we deal with India, and they are under trouble, and there's a lot of pressure on them. So the question then is, how do you deal with it? Well, we are trying, but recently what the Americans have done with us is stopped the payment.
Yeah.
Don't have the money. The Chinese, on the other hand, have given you how much money? 4.5 billion is the money. That was one part, and the other one, and together it's about 70 billion. The Americans throughout independence, whatever they have paid us, is now about 90 billion. Whereas the Chinese have 70 billion. So how you deal out of this? And what the Americans have done is, they're not happy with it. And they said, we are not giving you money. Why? We don't have the money. How can we give you the money? So the Chinese are the only one who have the money, and therefore the situation have moved in their direction. Under the circumstances now, the Americans are giving a pressure. They said, yeah, okay, yes, we want to still continue with the Pakistanis, and you give little money for whatever little that I can give you. Okay. But we are in opposition after 3 meetings that happened, and they were not in a position. So we are not in a position to deal with the Americans now. So what we are left with only what? The Chinese. And the money is available to us. The rest is we have to give to the Americans after a year, whatever money, we'll give it to them back as a result of that. But other than that, Pakistan is facing all this and trying to develop itself, or it can over a period of time. And this will develop. And they are the only people that are dealing with us. And they have their own interest, not in this part of the world, but the Middle East or Africa, or including the United States.
Okay.
Not the one which is interested, but it is the northern areas.
Okay, so let's discuss
So
the money.
the question
issue then.
is that under the circumstances, if this is the situation, how Pakistan stands in relation to it, and what position it can take. Now, we are not happy with the Americans. The Americans are not happy with us either. And therefore, this is the situation. We would rather be the Chinese and continue to progress and develop in the period of time. And if the Americans and the Indians and the Afghanistan will continue to create problems for us, we'll deal with it. And I don't think there was not much is to be done. And I don't think the Americans cannot do it, nor the Chinese, because a lot of money, it's not only the Chinese money, it's that money that was given to the Americans. Americans had the money. And they have taken over many of their money. And the question is, they don't have PESI, and how they are going to invest there, or they will change their ideas because they have the money. They don't have the money. And how many countries in this part of the world where we live, the kind of power that is with 6 people who have the power, including Iran. We may not have that, but they have the capacity and probably do that and create a problem.
If you let me come in, because you made some very good points there, and I wanted to put that to Zanera. Zanera, when we talk about the money, and I think that it's important to address this point now that it's come up, the fact that the Americans have stopped what they call aid, but the Pakistanis know it's not actually aid, it's actually money that they're due for the fact that the Pakistan has been very, very cooperative when it comes to the war in Afghanistan vis-a-vis allowing supplies to go over through its border. So if you can just correct that narrative for us, because as you know well, in the international media, international politicians discuss this in very incorrect terms, don't they?
They do, and it all comes out of University of Nebraska because I know they sit there, they coin terms, and they just know how to play with it, and then that is passed on to Pentagon, and Pentagon approves it, and then Congress starts playing with it, and the media starts playing with it. The problem that we are, maybe we are not looking at is that starting from 9/11, the kind of terrorism they sold to the world at that time, it was originating from Afghanistan, right? And now Afghanistan is slowly going out of the picture, and Pakistan is coming in, rather fitting into that picture, that all the safe havens and all the harboring of terrorism, abetting and all that facilitators, that actually is coming from Pakistan. How does that narrative changed? Who changed it? It's a slow process, and that's how they change terminologies, that's how they change the definitions, that's how they now say our money, which was once Coalition Support Fund, right? So what was that fund about? Because there were joint operations, right? And well, we did our part, we did fence the border, we did make our agencies clear, we merged it into a mainstream province. What have you done? You're not even capable of running your government in Kabul, right? So it's a clear defeat that Americans can see. And unfortunately, the problem is that we no longer live in the era where there are open battles and open wars. There are wars like Iraq, where chemical weapons are thrown upon you from the air, and then there are boots on the ground. We unfortunately live in the era where there are spy agencies which are more active rather than the actual soldiers. So this is like a game which is ongoing, and we need to understand it. And we have to have a very dynamic and very comprehensive response, both at Foreign Office level and at the military level. We have to be ready for it, with or without money. Countries have survived, nations have survived, and we will. And that's what we want to address to the world, that whatever you are listening from CNN or Fox News or BBC is not all correct. Come to this country, see for yourself how people are living. We have one 9/11 incident once in a month. We have people, we lost 144 children in just one incident of terrorism. So things are larger than how they try to portray it.
Okay, we're just going to go to a very short break. Zunaira and Professor Nasir will be back with you. As Zunaira there mentioned right before going to this break, I wanted to bring that up, is the fact that we need to talk about terminology as well, and that's something that we will address right after this break. Welcome back. We're still discussing terrorism here on The Scope. And Professor Nasir, right before going to this break, Zunaira brought up a very good point about terminology. Terrorism as it is defined by the West. We know that that's not the only definition of terrorism, or possibly it can be debated about whether it is the correct term or not. But there's terrorism of all sorts, isn't there? There's white supremacists in the United States who go into theaters and shoot up cinema halls. What do you make of that?
This is interesting development that has taken place, and this particular opinion she mentioned about it, and whether you want to look at the opinion or you don't opinion with it. I don't think I agree with it, with that opinion. In my opinion, the situation that has changed over time, and what do you see is the Americans, the Europeans, both together, and don't talk about the Chinese yet. All of them, the Europeans, the Western part, they are trying to be independent and do their things internally because they have a serious problem themselves, the Europeans. And the Americans don't have the money, by the way. And so how they wish to play with it, that's an interesting question. Who's going to do this? Under the circumstances, the European part of it, and all the powers there, 3, 4 of them, they are not interested anymore, and they are going towards China. And whatever little money they can add to it, or the resistance that can come from the Chinese side. Now, this is actually what has happened. So the kind of a world that we deal with, what kind of a world are? Is it the one we dealt with during the Cold War period and subsequently? But after the breakdown, and you had a new development emerged, and yet it is not known that this part, there is not one state which is controlling at this time. So under the circumstances, what I always remember from the American scholar who talked about it some like 10, 14 years back, and he said that the relations that the Americans and the Chinese developed back to 1972, and we continue to have good relations with them. And around 2007, the Americans took the position that we should never turn against the Americans. And in the process, the money that has come of the Chinese to the Americans, although what is happening now, they are in a position to create some kind of issues here and there, but can they create a problem for them? And if they cannot, then the question is, in the 2 years, 4 years, 5 years down, the Chinese are going to have, are controlling, and they are not taking a position and create problems for them. So the question, what the world that we talk about, that we live today, is a different world altogether. So we do not have that kind of interpretation. One person or another person talks about it. There is no interpretation for this so far. And therefore, I think you have to deal with it. And I personally very strongly believe in this. And the way things have developed and changed over time, I don't think one particular state, except for the Chinese, who are a lot of money, and they are spending it, but they are still not threatening them, because they think they need 5 to 10 years before they have this strength.
So let's talk about the money concept that you just mentioned, because I think it's important to address that, isn't it, Zunaira? That a lot of this possibly does have to do with the economy and proxy wars and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of terminology that we can use in that regard, but a lot of it does come down to the fact that we just, in 2008, had this global recession. The world is still recovering and possibly has not fully recovered from that recession yet and that crisis yet. So do you think that, and what part do you think, let me put it this way, does the economy of these specific countries play into the fact that we're seeing these proxy wars, different groups being labeled terrorists, the other groups not being labeled terrorists, et cetera?
Well, there already is a trade war, as I said, going on.
Yes.
Not long ago, like 4 or 5 months back, we came to know about that oil company Aramco in Saudi Arabia, that 30 years from now, they will be dealing in yen, no more in dollar.
Right.
So the currency shift is going to be there, and America is actually worried about it. But at the same time, new power centers are emerging based on economy.
Yeah.
Look at the coming back of Putin. The way they are coming back, it's massive. Even Germany feels threatened. That's why they are still collaborating with them. Not all of the European countries agree to Germany, but Germany still is doing that because they are dependent on the gas and energy supplies like that. So every country is actually following its own trade routes. So economy is center. It is core to everything, no doubt. But in the periphery, I would say there is always geography and there is always politics. Geopolitics is always part of economy. We can never separate them. There is always a hybrid reason. At times, politics takes precedence, so there is a war. At times, economy takes precedence, so there is a war.
Right.
So at the moment, yes, there is a trade war going on, and every country is trying to engage and invest in strategic projects. For example, if Iran also pulls into CPEC, if Saudi Arabia is also pulling in, and eventually, if Russia is also pulling in, so you see that there is a complete disconnect between this part of the world and US. So yes, this is about economy. And more than economy, if I link it to the terrorism, the only way to control this is through terrorism, sending in some groups in the name of Daesh, creating Taliban, then creating some other groups. What about KK clan coming back? I mean, where is that coming from? I never thought in this era, sometime now people will be coming out saying that we are inspired by Hitler, fascism, and stuff like that. And the gun shootings in US, that is none of their concern. They are not bothered about that. What happened to Khashoggi? Nobody is concerned that a man is killed in the broad daylight in such a brutal manner by a state representative, rather a crown prince. Everybody is just bothered about the arms deal. Everybody is talking about, well, that trade is going to stay with or without the human rights. So yes, it's a dangerous age we are living in, and that's how we are going to get out of it.
So I wanted to go, Professor, to this conversation about terrorism within the United States itself, within U.S. borders. As Zunaira correctly mentioned, gun violence is pretty much a daily reality in the United States. We just had a 13-year-old girl who was killed, even though she's written an essay on gun violence herself in the United States, within its borders. So what do you make of that sort of terrorism within the United States, which is not spoken about in the media?
I think before I get to this, I think the other thing that we need to bear in mind is that what the mechanist, these powers over there in United States, who are the people who are making the final decision, and they make the decisions with us, and what kind of decisions are being made? What do you think are the people there? Is the American president responsible for it? Or the other groups within the United States? Who is making the decision these days? For the last few days, who made the decision? The American president. He was making a bizarre kind of statement. I'm sorry for using this word. But the others are making the decisions. And a decision that has been made that Pakistan is to be dealt with differently. And we are very, very careful about it, and we want to deal with the Pakistanis. Now, the United States itself, the president and the others, they are not in a position to make a decision. So this is a very interesting stage these days where the American president and the other guy, they are not making the decisions. So who is making the decision in the United States? The president? I'm very, very seriously doubt about that. So the question is, with these kind of developments which are taking place, what kind of this part of the world that we deal with, the world cannot be changed over a period of time, because now how many bombs that we have in this part? How many of them? 6 of them? This part? And include the Americans and Europeans and this part. You have this. But some of them, if forever, for God, let's say, if this happens, then there will be a war. War cannot take place under the circumstances, in my opinion. And the power, at least so far as these 6 bombers are there, and they cannot do anything seriously. And therefore, I think under the circumstance, war is no more an option anymore. War is not available. So if that is the case, then under the circumstances, the United States or the Europeans are going to create a situation which will be Devi friendly. I don't think the Europeans are very, very friendly with the Americans anymore. There are serious issues with them, because the kind of money that the Americans used to pay for since since the World War, 50 onwards, they have been making the payment, and now they have pulled out from that. They don't have the money. The Europeans do not have the money. They have serious problems.
Yeah.
So my question is that I'm very happy with this situation. I'm very happy with that the Americans will not be able to do this, and the Europeans will not do that. And we are happy with the Chinese.
Let's talk
they
about
continue
Europe.
With that.
Let's talk about Europe and America and their relationship, because I think that plays an important part in this issue of terrorism, doesn't it, Zunaira? Because Europe right now has asylum seekers showing up on its borders.
Yeah.
Europe is not happy about that.
Yeah.
These wars were started by the United States and Europe, to a large extent, NATO.
Yeah.
Do you think now that there is that gap growing between Europe and the United States, and how they both view the wars that are taking place or have taken place in this region? We can name Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and now Syria as well. What do you think of that?
As we discussed before, that where are these policies made? Where is this aura of invasion taking place actually, that, okay, we are going to this country, we are going to that country? They never foresee so many immigrants coming. They never had this clue that there will be so much instability in the region, that where else would those people go? If the whole of the Middle East is crumbling, of course people will go towards Europe, not towards another Middle Eastern country. So the kind of deals coming out are right now coming out of European Union is Brexit. Right? Okay, we do not want to be with you anymore because we do not want to pay for your defense. We do not want only Europeans working in our corporates. At the same time, they have now an indoor debate going on that whether we should go for Brexit or not, because Britishers are not ready to work in the farms. It was the Italians who were working in the British farms, So they are tiny but very basic things, like disturbing the agricultural economy of Britain, disturbing the war and defense implications of Britain. Now Germany is looking at a different angle. Germany is looking towards USSR. Right. France is very annoyed with the US because of the climate change treaty that they cancelled. Other Scandinavian countries, they actually don't have a say. They just follow whatever is happening with the Germany or the France or the other countries. So, did you notice that statement of Macron that we need to have a separate European army?
Yes.
You know where it is heading now.
Yeah.
So they're not happy with America. If they're not happy with America, that means they are insecure now. So they want to have their own army. If they're going to have their own army, do you think it is only for defense? No. It would mean more expense and more expenditure for defense forces. So the war economy is actually run by selling the arms, not by containing them.
But then that's an interesting point, Zanira. I'm glad you brought that up because the arms industry is very important, isn't it? And do these governments, especially in Europe, not realize that the more arms they sell, the more instability elsewhere in the world, and the more terrorism even at home? We've had terrorist attacks in London, Paris, you can name any pretty much capital in Europe, and you've had a terrorist attack of some sort. So what do you make of that? Why aren't these policymakers in these governments realizing that?
Because it's money. It's money for them. Like American military complex, nobody talks about that. Wherever I go, Professor, I would like to involve you into the conversation. Wherever I'm representing Pakistan, I'm asked, why so much of your budget is allocated to defense? Do you know how much of defense allocation goes to American military complex?
Right.
Do you have any idea? It's double of what Pakistan is doing. The arms control and arms deals, they are the basic economy for the countries like America, Britain, France, and Germany. They will keep on doing that. These are the lobbies which are electing American presidents. These are the super PACs which are backing Congress. If they are so kind of in control, and if they are so lobbied with a country like Israel, do you think they care about human rights?
The role of how Islam and religion is spoken about when it comes to connecting it with terrorism. I think it's a very important topic to discuss. We'll be right back after this short break with more on that. All right, we're back in the scope with me, Waqar, Rizvi, and we're continuing our discussion with our esteemed guests who are joining us live right here in our studio, Zanira Azhar and Professor Sajjad Nasir, and we're discussing the very important issue of terrorism. Professor Nasir, before I went to break, I said that I wanted to bring up the role of religion and how it's spoken about specifically when it comes to terrorism. As I cited, there are examples, of course, in the United States of white supremacists. Even in the UK, we have the EDL group, we have other such groups who carry out sometimes violent attacks against others. Why is terrorism brought in, why is religion, I should say, brought into this when the famous saying goes, terrorism really has no religion? What do you say to that?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and the real thing is that who are the people talking about this in terms of ideology, the ideology?
Okay.
Or people have their own ideas of their own and talk about it. I think in terms of time in which we are operating now, I think it is not possible anymore left that the way it used to happen before, it is not there. Everyone is doing personally from their particular interest. They are making their questions in order to deal with it, and that is what is required at the moment. A minority, a small minority who may still talk about, the socialist or the others, but the majority, the bulk of it, they are not interested. They are interested, there are problems of dealing with it and how to deal with them. And therefore, the question is that how do you deal with the ideology or other kind of ideas that we deal with? You see, the Americans have new ideas that they're talking about. The Europeans are talking about it. Who do they have it? And what kind of things that they are referring to it? The Americans that we dealt with when we were a student ourselves and we talked about it. Who are the people, what kind of ideas that we used to deal at that time? But today, I don't think we come across that. So there is a big issue now. The Chinese, they haven't adopted a position on this, that what kind of a country is this for themselves and for the rest of the world. Who are they deal with them? How they don't talk about it. This is not. So I think the question is that how do you deal with it? I am the Pakistanis and the different kind of people that talk about and they take a position on it. Yes, in a way, I can still maintain that yes, they have their position, but they will not benefit.
Okay,
change it.
Let's talk about ideology, because that's
Right.
that's an important point. Ideology is obviously plays a factor in this, but it's not the kind of ideology that is spoken about. It's ideology of extremism of
It
all
used to.
sorts, be it Christian or Judeo-Christian extremism, be it Buddhist extremism, as we've seen in Myanmar and Burma, or Hindu extremism, as we see with Hinduttvas in
Yeah.
India. Or there's so many examples, we could cite them all day. Zionism, exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you make of the ideology, and why is it only Muslims, when a Muslim man carries out an attack, even if it's a crime, and we of course accept it's a crime, but why is that blamed on his religion?
Well, to be honest, it's an intellectual debate, but it has such a profound impact on Muslims all over the world that we have to address it sooner or later.
Yes.
I think in the context of Pakistan, it all started back when there was Cold War going on. And I remember a picture, I have that picture, I wish I could bring it here, where President Reagan is sitting with Haqqani. And he is saying that you are the moral equivalents of our founding fathers. And he was equating jihadis of that time, which was like Taliban, with Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton. Just imagine. So at that time, when they needed that spirit of Muslims to defeat the communists, they used it to the fullest extent. After that, they just kept them loose. They were not funded anymore. They were not taken care of. So they became a militant group who knew they have power, they have weapons, and they have all the techniques that the ISI had, that the CIA had. So they became manipulators. And that's how they start to bring the bad name to Islam. And later on, it became very easy that wherever there is a terrorist attack, like in 9/11, oh, those were the Muslims. So it is the Islam actually, which is bringing jihad or militancy into the forefront of the world. So it's very easy. I remember last year in Manchester, there was an attack in a concert, and the guy raised some religious slogan and just started to stab people. Now, nobody understands a word in Arabic other than Allahu Akbar and Assalamu Alaikum. The moment you say it, nobody questions your faith. You just assume you are a Muslim. So there are stab attacks going on in London, and you see a headline or a news on BBC that they were chanting religious slogan and they were stabbing people. So this is stereotyping, in my opinion. You are just generalizing the whole idea. What is happening in Yemen? It's a Muslim country doing something to Muslims. What is happening in Israel? It's state terrorism done by Jews or Zionists. You have to differentiate. So there has to be, I wish there is a greater debate about it someday, somewhere, but I wonder if people want to do it or not.
So as a security expert yourself, Zunaira, then how important is it for the definition of terrorism to be changed, for there to be real security for everybody?
It is as important as anything else, because when you just look at terrorism as an act of terror, that can come from anyone, let it be a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, or anyone. It's an act of hate. It's an act of crime. It's an act of violence. You have to see the person who is doing it and the intent behind it. You should punish him, not his religion, and not all the people who are following that religion. So it has to be defined.
Okay, and Professor Nasir, I wanted to get your opinion on that too. Do you think that going forward, all these countries that are affected by terrorism, be it Pakistan, be it the United States, be it Europe, can they work together to actually defeat all forms of terrorism?
Well, it is very difficult, to this decision that you can just dismiss all of them and come together and bring a unity. I don't think that's possible. Historically speaking, over a period of time.
Why not?
People have their own way of thinking of them.
Okay.
And that's how they think about it. This is how they believe in it. And the belief system still is important. Now, I think for me it is important what, for instance, what is development that is taking place. Who has the development? I cannot do that development. It's the Chinese that is giving us the money now to make this movement and development. So they are spending. So what kind of a believer am I at? And there are, let's say, 4, 6, or 8 of them who have their own believers. So how to deal with them? So the question, I think this is a situation and a problem where the foreigners who has the power, they have the authority, and the others, they're just believers. And as believers, they're doing that kind of all the things that they do, which create more problems for us. In fact, the Chinese are not interested in this and don't get into this and stay away from it and let this development take place. So this is how actually happens if we restricting to this particular. So this is the way you deal with it. But the believers, some percentage of people still believe, and they don't want to change this. And you look the numbers now. When I was young, then you could, move in this world without any problem or difficulty.
Right.
Now the believers in different part, they're spending their days, weeks together, spend their time.
Right.
So how do you deal with them? And that kind of money of 70 billion, that they are spending it for us. So what is the relationship and the context in which we can work with this?
All right.
So I think that's a big question.
We'll leave that as our final word.
Yeah.
We, of course, appreciate both of you coming into our studios and sharing your insight with us on this very important topic. There was Ms. Zunaira Azhar, security expert, and Professor Sajjad Nasir, defense analyst himself as well, sharing their expertise with us. And it's important, isn't it, viewers, to look at this issue of terrorism without any biases, and to discuss the fact that terrorism takes many, many forms. And unless all those forms are discussed and all of those forms are brought into the fore, that defeating this terrorism cannot occur unless we are unbiased in defeating all forms of hate, as Zunaira brought up as well. That's a very important point to make going forward. And of course, we hope for that to happen someday soon in the future. We'll leave it there for now. That was Scope, and I'm Waqar Rizvi.